The meeting is being recorded. All of you know the drill. Place your telephone on mute when you're not speaking. Leave your computer microphone on mute at all times if you have dialed in with a phone. And then when you speak, please announce your name so that we can have good record keeping. And feel free. I think we can still use the chat function. That's been working for our group. We've all been well trained and well schooled. So next slide, please. So today, again, I'm Tim Tomier. I am one of your co-chairs. Warren is other co-chair. And of course, without the help of ADWR and many others, we wouldn't be able to be where we are today, which is the last subcommittee meeting before the full GWAC meeting in March. We're on the cusp. This is that moment in time where start picking out your outfits, because there'll be the group photo that's going to be shown in every PowerPoint moving forward. So just, bear that in mind when you get close to the finish line. Wardrobe choices matter. So on behalf of my co-chair and others, I'd like to welcome you all to the Post-2025 AMA's Committee of the Governor's Water Council, and thank you for your continued participation and ongoing commitment to this committee. We are lively, we are engaged, and we are breaking records every meeting. This committee, as you know, is charged with identifying challenges to groundwater management within the active management areas, or AMAs, and generating strategies and solutions to address those challenges well past 2025. Before figuring out solutions or strategies, we've been working throughout 2020 and now into 2021 to first identify and, to the degree possible, agree upon the opportunities or issues in the AMAs that can improve groundwater management. And again, we're putting on our forward-looking glasses here. To date, we have identified 6 issues. 4 of those issues are ready to go. We have the exempt wells, the hydrologic disconnect, unreplenished groundwater withdrawals, and AMA management structure. They're ready to go to the full GWAC in March. And we have completed summaries and issue briefs for those issues. These issue briefs are intended to describe the issue, not describe the solution or strategies. That's the next phase of the process. So our objective today is to complete the other 2 issue briefs: groundwater and the Assured Water Supply Program, and Cagrd replenishment and water supplies. And these are the 2 we've been working on pretty heavily for the last several meetings and many iterations of issue statements and or issue documents over the past couple of months. So we're very, very close. We will also talk today about the committee's upcoming presentation to the full council on the 6 issue briefs and the other next steps of the committee. So once again, we appreciate your participation in helping to shape and develop each issue. This has truly been a collaborative effort. And please let us know if you'd like to speak by indicating in the chat, or go ahead and leave a comment directly in the chat. And if you happen to unmute yourself to jump in, because you want to just dive right in, but just make sure you announce yourself. But Warren and I and Carol will be looking at the chat pretty closely to make sure that we don't leave you languishing there. Next slide, please. So committee progress to date. So at our last meeting, December 17th, we had a productive discussion on how best to define the issue statements for the Assured Water Supply Program and for the CAGRD. We've been working on these issues since last August. So it's very good to reach general consensus on the issue statements. With those issue statements in place, the co-chairs, mostly one of the co-chairs, and then this one was just sort of like, cheering them on, but that's okay. We drafted issue briefs to provide further background and description for those 2 statements about groundwater in the Assured Water Supply Program and CAGRD replenishment and water supplies. We did work with ADWR and CAGRD staff, as well as many of you, to draft the briefs, and then once completed, they were sent out to everybody on January 20th for your comments and review, and we did receive comments. Again, the issue brief only describes the issue. Our goal is to describe succinctly the issue to generate consensus, or as close to consensus as we can achieve, that this challenge poses an opportunity that we should address by developing strategies and solutions in order to improve water management in the AMAs, again, post-2025. So they're really to tee up the next discussion. Thanks for all the feedback. It's been very helpful, and it's also been very collegial. We've all been really a lot of opinions, a lot of a concern or support for things as they've been written, and a lot of back and forth. But it's made it stronger. It's made it better as we go. So thank you. It's been very helpful. So next slide. We did incorporate your feedback into the January 20th drafts and revised both draft issue briefs, which we shared with you on February 11th. So the February 11th versions, represent conversations dating back to August to that point, multiple iterations, both in the meetings and in the written comments. We were hoping that left some time for you, almost 2 weeks to review before today. We did send out both the clean and red line versions of the 2 issue briefs, and we also compiled and sent along the comments we received from committee members so you could see the feedback from others. We worked to combine and integrate numerous suggested wording changes from different committee members. And we also added footnotes when needed to try to better align some of the language that referred to statute so that it more directly referenced the exact statutory language. With your feedback and continued assistance from ADWR and CWCD staff, we feel that the revised issue briefs we sent on February 11th have been greatly improved and provide a good description of the 2 issues. We'd like to note that these 2 briefs have been more challenging for several reasons. First and foremost, there are strong perspectives regarding both the Assured Water Supply Program and the CAGRD. We all know that. We've had these conversations before. And we believe, though, that everyone has learned as a committee that try to understand each other's perspectives. That's why it's been so critical for all of us to be at this table, virtual table. It's been challenging to work through, as demonstrated by the time and effort and multiple revisions to produce something that the committee can stand behind. We feel that both briefs have become more focused and succinct in describing the issues. The format of the issue statements is different from the previous briefs, and I think that reflects the complexity of these issues. Since these 2 statements contain questions, we had to ensure that the briefs provided enough background information and then answered each of those questions succinctly. So where we are today. Today, we would like to go through the 2 issue briefs, provide a review of the main revisions that were made, and see if there are any final improvements that are needed to further clarify the issues. Again, our goal today is to finish our work on these 2 issue briefs. Now, we will walk through each brief and highlight the changes that were made, starting with the brief on groundwater and the Assured Water Supply Program. And for that, I will turn it over to Co-Chair Warren Tinney.
Thank you, Tim. Appreciate that update and overview. And as Tim described, we're wanting to walk through both of the issue briefs. We're going to go through the red line versions so that we can just go through them and talk about any issues that may still, anything that needs further clarification in those issue briefs. I did have a note, Bill Garfield, you wanted to make a comment. I don't know if you want to make the comment before or after we go through the issue briefs. So,
Warren, this is Bill Garfield. I'm fine with going after you go through the issue briefs.
Okay, great. Well, then let's jump in. We're going to start with the groundwater in the Assured Water Supply Program, and if we can bring that paper up.
Have we passed the ball over to Jessica?
Yes, that's what I think we're in the process of doing.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure our staff were on that. Thanks.
Thank you. So so in front of you is the red line version. We purposely do not have the red line in red because we want to keep this all, friendly. And so we're using a calming blue for the red line. So our green or aqua to represent water. So just to point out a few things here in front right off the bat, with the issue statement, you can see that we made a small change to avoid saying areas of the active management area. So that's pretty straightforward. But jumping into the background, there is a technical change based on a suggestion by ADWR that it would be good to note that the Assured and Adequate Water Supply Program applies statewide, while the Assured Water Supply Program is specifically for the AMAs. And then at the next paragraph in the background, we added some language about analysis that comes from the Assured Water Supply Rule, as well as ADWR's information on analysis of assured water supply. We thought that that was important to include after describing certificates and designations, to provide that background information before getting into the physical availability discussion that appears later on in the brief where the analysis was mentioned. And then just if we can go to the next page, just in this section regarding the background. Under the looking at the last paragraph of the background section, this paragraph clarifies that CAGRD was authorized, not created by the legislature. We had a number of comments regarding that, and that the final sentence was rewritten to more accurately reflect the statutory language regarding the CAGRD plan of operation. So overall, the changes to the background section are technical and hopefully quite straightforward. But wanted to pause here and see if there are any comments or suggestions about the background section.
Seeing none in chat so far, but that doesn't mean none are coming.
Well, let's move on to the issue statement. We do have a question. Would ADWR confirm that 1,000 feet below land surface applies to the Santa Cruz AMA?
I think that's what we use right now.
And so that question was from Kathy Ferris and Nicole Klobus, with ADWR just responded.
Warren, this is Doug.
Yes, Doug. I believe this is Doug Dunham, right?
That is correct, Doug Dunham. I would agree with Nicole, at least back in the ancient history when I was still there, that the 1,000-foot depth limit or bottom of the aquifer, what was standard used in the Santa Cruz AMA. The department has draft rules, but they were never brought to final promulgation that would change some of that.
Okay. So Bob Anderson just wrote, the paper should mention the plan reopener when mentioning the plan approval. Rob, could you state your comment a little more? I'm not sure if I'm reading it right.
Go above where it says issue description. You just mentioned the must approve the plan, and I'm just referring to the fact that if the water supplies are inadequate, or if there's a unexpected reduction in available supplies or unexpected increase in enrollment that the plant is reopened. It's not just a 10-year approval process.
Warren, this is Sandy.
Yes, Sandy.
And I agree with what Rob's saying, but maybe it's, rather than muddling this particular paper, maybe reference the other paper where you first mentioned this, that it's being discussed in another paper.
Yeah,
Not just
we
that,
were,
but the CAGRD and the plan of operation is being discussed in whatever the name of that issue brief is.
right. Yes,
More detail.
we had a mention of that in this brief, but we removed mention of it because we wanted this brief to focus more on just about CAGRD and just trying not to get too detailed about the CAGRD in this brief. But when we go through the CAGRD issue brief, then let's look at how that is described when talking about the plan of operation and see if there's something there that could be added. Does that make sense or does that work for you, Rob?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Hey, Warren, this is Jake.
Yes, Jake.
Hey, are we just discussing the changes that we're seeing in the red line, or are you we open for just kind of general comments as well in these sections?
Yes, if there needs to be some general comments, or I mean, if there's ways to improve the overall paper, that we certainly would like to hear that.
Okay. Well, to that end, I have one, and I've read this a lot, and I've been working in water resources for a while, so I kind of just put on that water resources hat. But when I step back from it for a second, I realize it's really kind of narrowly focused, and maybe we could talk a little bit about the role that groundwater has historically had in Arizona. Maybe its actual amount of use, and the reason that came up to me is because I was reminded the other day of the economic study about how much groundwater use has contributed to GDP. So I think as we look for background and data points and other things about what the issue is and actually the scope of the issue and potentially the reach of our actions, I think it might be important to include a little bit more background for understanding. And I'm sorry I didn't provide any draft text on that. It's occurred to me since, well, actually the last day. So,
No, Jake, we appreciate that comment. I guess one of the things, and Tim alluded to this, and maybe can explain a little more about this, but our approach has been to look at specific issues, but we acknowledge and recognize that all of these issues are interconnected. And so, for example, this brief is specifically regarding assured water supply rules and groundwater in the assured water supply rules and trying to focus there, whereas one of the other briefs dealing with unreplenished groundwater withdrawals goes into that discussion about also gives additional background and information about groundwater. I think in a number of places there's references about in that paper as well as this paper, references about the importance of the economy. And again, we were just trying our best to be as succinct as possible. But I just want to remind everyone that the issue briefs need to be looked at as a whole. That it's there. We tried our best to address each one individually, but still recognize that there's a whole that they're all interconnected together. I don't know if that helps or explains more of what the thoughts were. Any other thoughts about that from the rest of the group? Oh, I see that, Rob, you have a general comment you wanted to.
Yeah, and Warren, I think I let Spencer or David get into this in more detail, but I just wanted to, if we're talking about general comments about this paper, our concerns with both papers relate to the fact that we basically identify issues and concerns, but exactly how that leads to solutions is really hard to grasp here, because these concerns are stated in such a very general way. But let me drill down on this particular paper, and in particular, the paper is focusing on new growth after 2025. And of course, new growth on groundwater after 2025 is right now under law largely required to be replenished. But the paper, when it talks about what happens, and what happens with growth on groundwater, is it essentially, I don't know if I would go so far to say as it assumes, but it basically lists a parade of things that can happen, but those would generally happen if there's no replenishment. For example, we've got that statement in there about unless steps are taken to reduce or ameliorate the impacts of groundwater drawdown, depths to water would decline, resulting in land subsidence, decreased aquifer storage, etc. Those are all things that would happen if we had new growth happening on groundwater without replenishment. Now, if we have continued use of groundwater to support existing uses and none of that is replenished, then all of those factors do come into play. But I think the paper could do a better job of acknowledging that whether or not replenishment occurs will affect that answer. Also, just one more specific comment. There's sort of an odd circular analysis in here, in which we say that the ability to raise concerns about the fact that if we continue to grow on groundwater, then we'll run out of physical supplies. But what they're basically saying there, if we continue to grow on groundwater, we will no longer be able to grow on groundwater. I'm not sure what sense that makes.
So, Rob, would it'd be helpful, at least for me, I don't know about for everyone else, if as we're going through the paper, you point out those specific sections that you were just referring to, so that we can, I think it would be easier for us to focus and, more importantly, understand the points you're making.
Okay, will do.
Okay, so why don't we go ahead and go into the issue description, and then we can see what thoughts are there. And so under this first question that had the committee came up regarding to have these questions in addition to the issue statement is under the issue description. The first question asks about the role and consequences of groundwater supporting new growth. The first paragraph was edited for clarity so that it focused more on the role of groundwater aspect in the question. And the second paragraph was further refined to focus on the consequences and attempt to state them more clearly. We also added language on groundwater physical availability challenges in other AMAs rather than only focus on the Pinal AMA. So that's what we were trying to do with the changes made, but we're would like to hear if there's any comments or suggestions regarding this page here. And
Hey, Warren, Jake again.
yes, Jake.
Hey, I just wanted to re-throw out that idea that the groundwater, you know, has been historically significant in growth, and you know that maybe there's something here if we're talking about consequences. You know, maybe if somehow it isn't there, there is a real negative consequence. I think it's in here. Maybe. I'm really sorry. I think I need to probably just shoot you some draft language on some of these. I wish I was able to get to it earlier, but yeah, it just seems a little bit light on, you know, we're hitting a huge issue really topically and really kind of from one angle. So I think, yeah, I'm sorry. I'll work on developing something that's maybe has some data points in it, and maybe send it out in chat, or if I can get it done while we're meeting, or maybe after. But thanks for letting me ramble.
Oh, that's fine. Believe me, there's been lots of rambling about these briefs. Sandy made a comment. Would it be clearer to say we would be unable to continue to grow on replenished groundwater? And then Doug, you had a comment, so Doug, do you want to?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if you were through yet. So, yeah, I think what I would like to comment would be with that follow on what Sandy wrote, and then what Rob alluded to is that the points that are being brought out in this section, particularly the specifics on extinguishment credits, the basic groundwater allowances, all of those disappear after 2025. And so if we're looking at post-2025, those are not in this rule structure anymore. So that's gone. And all of the issues of groundwater declines, the you know, cats and dogs living together, you know, all of those negative things. Sorry, I had to throw in a Ghostbusters line. All of those negative things would occur on unreplenished. And so to throw in the same sentence, to throw the GRD enrollment in there, that's apples and oranges. And so really the concerns would be if we continue to grow on unreplenished groundwater. Sorry, my dog. Not going up.
Next, we'll hear the cats.
The cats are coming next. Lay down, lay down, lay down. Thank you. Enough. Anyway, he has very strong feelings about this as well. So, so it's the unreplenished piece that gets us into these problems, and so I think that needs to have better differentiation in this section of you know, what problems may occur if we continue to grow on unreplenished versus if we continue to do the replenishment, and then, like you said, the related problems of where all that happens is addressed in some of the other papers. And I'll mute so I can beat on my dog.
So I guess there's an agreement with Doug, and I guess if I'm following correctly, the suggestion is, are you suggesting that we don't even need to, I mean, we reference under the current regulatory structure. And so is the concern, Doug, that we should just rephrase that?
I think, sorry, Warren, I think that statement in and of itself is correct. Under the current regulatory structure, these things allow unreplenished groundwater. But it needs to be pointed out that moving forward, those allowances are going to go away. And in reality, we're getting to the point post-2025 where any new groundwater use will have to be replenished, and I think that needs to be clarified. I mean, if we're going to be discussing how groundwater use, what the negative impacts are, it needs to correctly reflect that the vast majority of this new subdivision growth under the Assured Water Supply Program is not just considered consistent with the goal because of these exemptions, but that it actually will be. Physically, it is going to be replenished.
Okay. Any thoughts from DWR?
So this is Nicole, and I think to some extent there is recognition in the sentence that groundwater depletion can be mitigated when replenishment occurs in close proximity. And then I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there's also a reference to the hydrologic disconnect, not necessarily at this point, but at a different location, possibly. Again, I know that these are intended to be very brief descriptions of the issues. So I'm not sure, they're not intended to be 20 to 50 page analyses. I know some of the issues can be complicated. So I guess without more detail on what types of changes should be made, it's hard to say. I don't necessarily have a problem. Sandy's edit might be helpful as well.
So we certainly could add a footnote that talks about that new groundwater allowances phase out in 2025, but we do have a question of asking, is extinguishment credit allowance ending in 2025 in Pinal in 2025, or was that extended beyond that timeline?
Warren, if I could answer that, there was a rule change in January of 2019 that set up a new method for calculating extinguishing credits. They do not end in 2025. They are effectively a given period of time that those credits can be applied against assured water supply purposes, but it does not end in 2025. And I would just suggest people look at the rules that were adopted in January of 19 to find out more about that, but they do not end in 2025, unlike the other AMAs.
Okay.
And then I would
Warren,
also
if I may,
just
this is Doug again.
Go
Michelle,
ahead.
Nicole.
And then Nicole, go ahead, and then Doug.
I was just going to say that with respect to the other AMAs aside from Pinal, the ability to extinguish grandfathered rights may expire in 2025, and groundwater allowances for new certificates may go to 0 in 2025, but that doesn't mean that pre-existing or issued extinguishment credits cannot continue to be applied to certificate applications after 2025.
Okay. Doug?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow on with Bill's comment. The conceptually, the canal extinguishment credits function as a time expiring concept. So the credits would be created, but they have a limited lifespan. So if they're not used, or if they're the water is not actually pumped during the early part of the life of that certificate, they actually go away. So they expire in and of themselves. It's not necessarily tied to a calendar date, but they don't remain around forever. So just a little bit different concept.
Okay. So I guess we certainly could add a footnote to provide clarification about the groundwater allowance. I'm trying to understand what else is problematic, or what could be improved here in this section right here of the paper. Does it need more explanation about the use? And clearly, is we could try to emphasize more on the unreplenished part, or the part about, the unreplenished aspect that Doug's pointed out. But Kathy Ferris has a comment.
So bear with me. I've got a weed blower outside my my door. I think we're really getting into the weeds on this. I thought that this sentence was just fine the way it is, and to have to go in and nuance every AMA and every single thing, like the groundwater allowances, which do continue in some of the AMAs, and distinguish all of this, just seems like more than what this paper is trying to do. This is an overall statement of the issue, and it's not, I don't think it's intended to be a white paper or a research paper. So I think you've done really a good job of sorting through a myriad of comments that people had the opportunity to make over the last month, and pulling something together that seems to accurately portray. Some people might want more, some people might want less. Some people don't think it goes far enough, and some people think it goes too far. But I think this sentence is fine, and I don't think you want to talk about growing on unreplenished groundwater, because then you have to get into the issue of, well, will it be replenished? And that's really not what this paper is about. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kathy. So Doug is suggesting a footnote for the details, but a sentence in the body to clarify that the bulk of exemptions go away post-2025. And I don't see why we couldn't do that. So, and also just to pick up on Kathy's comment, she's correct. Our intent has always been that these are brief, they're issue briefs, and so we can do that. Is there any other comments regarding this page?
This is Spencer. I just had a follow-up because I thought this whole conversation started on making the distinction on unreplenished groundwater withdrawals may impact the ability to grow. And I kind of am confused about where we left that original comment.
Well, I think we've noted there in the first paragraph that's on the screen at the bottom that notes that groundwater depletion can be mitigated when replenishment occurs in close proximity to the withdrawals. And so
I was referencing the beginning sentence on the second paragraph.
Oh, okay. Continue. I'm sorry, Spencer.
That was it. I was just referencing the first paragraph of this, the first sentence in the second paragraph. I thought maybe I was focused on the wrong section, but I think that's the issue that was mentioned earlier as it relates to the ability to grow on unreplenished groundwater withdrawals.
Okay, so it says groundwater withdrawals may impact the ability of new applicants to demonstrate physical availability of groundwater. And I guess I would ask ADWR, is there our understanding is that because replenishment doesn't necessarily increase physical availability, that this statement there is correct. ADWR, does there need to be something more clarifying according to what Spencer was referring to?
Can you highlight the statement that we're talking about?
Yes,
Hey,
right there.
hey, Warren, can I jump in and let me just flesh out, because this goes back to the comment that I made about this being circular. This is the paragraph I was referring to.
Okay.
So the first sentence, and this just to help Nicole respond to the question. This first sentence talks about groundwater withdrawals. Go up to the heading for a second. The heading says, what are the role and consequences of the use of groundwater to support new growth after 2025? And then this paragraph starts with, well, groundwater withdrawals. Now, without any kind of qualifier, I would read groundwater withdrawals as groundwater withdrawals by new growth impact the ability to demonstrate an assured water supply, physical availability of groundwater for assured water supply. Well, yeah, I guess that's true. But all of that assured water supply approvals are reservations of groundwater for new growth. So I think what we mean to say here is that groundwater withdrawals, and this isn't a consequence of groundwater, of development of groundwater. This is a possible or maybe even likely outcome of continued unreplenished groundwater use directly and significantly affects the availability of groundwater for physical availability purposes. Pinal AMA, great example, 80% of the water is basically used by the agricultural sector. That's the real limitation on being able to demonstrate that there's new groundwater available to support new growth. So this paragraph isn't really about what are the consequences of using groundwater to grow on. This is one of the things that could happen to our ability to grow on groundwater because of other uses of groundwater. Did that make sense?
I think I'm following. So how would you rephrase that? And then I'll see if Nicole agrees. I'll defer to Nicole.
So groundwater withdrawals by all sectors, particularly that is not replenished, will impact the ability of new certificates and new to demonstrate a physical availability of groundwater.
Can't argue with that.
Wow, that's a win. Thanks. Anyway, it ends up being kind of awkward because the heading is what's the consequence of new growth, but what we're really talking about is what's the consequence of continued reliance on groundwater by all sectors on the ability to demonstrate. Well, clearly we have physical availability of groundwater is impacted by continued use of groundwater by all sectors.
So I just put in the chat what I thought I was hearing or understanding is that groundwater withdrawals by all sectors will impact the ability of new certificates applicants to demonstrate physical availability of groundwater. Okay, so then Doug's suggesting unreplenished. Jessica, can you add that in, or can you make that change there? Just so
Yeah,
that
let me
everyone
pull
can
up the
see-
chat.
just so that everyone can see it on the paper.
I think it's working towards something, Warren.
So then we have a
Does that
comment.
cover it?
Well, there was a suggestion of putting unreplenished groundwater withdrawals, but then Natalie Mast with ADWR says replenish groundwater withdrawals would also impact physical availability if the replenishment is occurring distant from the pumping.
Right, and that was a nuance we wanted to capture through comments we received in the last round as well, since in particular the GRD was not formed with the idea of helping create physical availability or anything like that. It was just to replenish. So that's the point Natalie made, was exactly what we were trying to capture when we rewrote this sentence.
Okay, so now we're getting suggestions about Rob Anderson agrees with Natalie. Kathy Ferris also agrees and is suggesting why not just delete the first sentence. And then Doug made a reference about the hydrologic disconnect paper of the point that in regards with Natalie. And Eric is saying that he's good with the edit as currently written. So
Warren,
yes, Tim.
Just weighing in a bit. I think the edit as currently written kind of covers the general gist of this and leaves enough room for us to explore in the next phase.
Yeah, and I think that is a good point of putting in there that that when we're talking about groundwater withdrawals, we're talking about those of all sectors, not just anything new coming up. So Rob, does that provide the clarification you were, or does that clarification help with the point you were trying to make?
Which clarification are we talking about now?
Where that's the red line there where it says groundwater withdrawals by all sectors will impact the ability of new certificates.
Yeah, that's fine.
New assured water supply applicants to demonstrate physical
That's
availability.
fine.
Okay. Oh, good. Well, let's, any other comments or suggestions for this page right here? And we appreciate everyone's patience as we edit and write by committee. So Jessica, let's go ahead down to the next page. Bear with us as we're There we go. Just a little bit more. So on this, under the second question, we removed the first two sentences because they seem to be a bit leading, plus the opening question already asks about risk. Otherwise, changes were non-substantive. At least we thought they were. And then a sentence was added to note that ultimately homeowners rely on their water providers for service regardless of the assured water supply status, and that they expect a level of consumer protection from the government. This was meant to clarify and temper any discussion about the risks in year 101. Any thoughts regarding this paragraph?
Hey, Warren, it's Jake.
Yes, Jake.
Hey, should it say an expectation of consumer protection by their water provider? I mean, it really does come down to, hey, I pay this bill, I expect them to have me to have water. Expect them to have water for me. Just throwing that out there for general consumption.
No, appreciate that. We were trying to, figure the best way to describe it. We thought that, we noted that homeowners rely on the water provider for the service, but the consumer protection may be coming from, a lot of times folks will turn to expect that the state through either DWR or the ACC or, not just the water provider of a major city, but they would turn to the actual city government and say, hey, we expect some protection here, that we're not going to just run out of water. So that was just the thinking. Anyone else thoughts on that?
I just want to agree. I think that adding that last sentence is positive. Honestly, where you have assured water supply, where you have this obligation to demonstrate 100 years worth of water, the risk to the homeowner is extremely attenuated, and they probably aren't particularly concerned about what happens in year 101. So I do think that addition captures that concept.
Okay. Good. Any other comments? Let's go ahead and move down just a little bit. There seems to be about a 20-second delay as we try to move the paper on the screen. That's an FAA requirement in case there's any swearing going on while Jessica's moving it. So in the third question, we will admit that this looks a little messy because of the reordering that we did of the paragraphs under the third question. And hopefully Jessica can move it down just a little bit more. There we go. It may be easier to read via the clean version. We reordered the paragraphs as shown with the green text to add clarity. We believe the modifications now more clearly lay out the roadblocks to access renewable supplies and infrastructure. There were other minor changes, like the number of undesignated water providers was updated to 276, so it included all AMAs. And we removed mention of the CAGRD when discussing challenges in renewable supply availability, as this question is focused on groundwater dependent areas. We also brought back the reference to the Long-Term Augmentation Committee's report on supply availability for reference purposes and in response to feedback that we received. with these changes, we think this section answers the initial question more clearly, but would welcome any comments or suggestions. Rob, go ahead, please.
So I get what we're trying to do here. I discuss the fact that there's roadblocks, discuss the fact that there's challenges, but it's so general that I'm not sure what we actually get out of this, other than we all understand that acquiring water supplies are a challenge. And I guess that's just, I don't need to go and wordsmith, because I don't know that there's something specifically wrong with what's been drafted here, but some of the things, like, for example, the first paragraph, talks about there's no new designated providers in the past 20 years. Well, yeah, right. Because of the way the Assured Water Supply Program is set up, you have to acquire large amounts of supplies and hold them in reserve in order to demonstrate an assured water supply. And in a world in which there's no new CAP and in which groundwater is becoming more fully allocated, that's the challenge. That's exactly the issue that GRD was attempted to get at. So the general statements are correct, but it doesn't get to what the core issue is, which is what are some of the challenges? How do we attack those challenges? The second paragraph assumes that there's a lack of renewable supplies, but and then it cites to the augmentation paper. Well, like what's likely to happen in terms of available supplies, you can see this from the plan of operation, is we're moving supplies within Arizona from one use to another, or we're taking advantage of stored credits that we're going to be using that for providers that don't need all of their CAP water. So, there's challenges with renewable supplies, but there's also opportunities. And I guess I just skipped to the last paragraph. The town of Creek is an example of how difficult it is. I would also say that by the reverse is also true, is that they appear to be successfully acquiring supplies. So sort of an example of where an entity has worked at it and has successfully acquired new supplies. I think what's also interesting about this that we could carry over to the GRD paper is that this shows an example of how local providers acquiring their own water actually works in conjunction with GRD, because this results in a current groundwater use coming off the books for GRD, which is I think we'd agree was a positive thing. So, Warren, I don't have specific edits on this, just the general comment of this is such a general discussion of the topic that I'm not sure where it gets us in terms of identifying problems and identifying solutions. And I'll leave it at that.
Well, it certainly is not meant to provide any solutions, but it's hopefully pointing out the various issues. And the one you mentioned is captured in that third paragraph, or the second to the last paragraph here, of the obstacles of having to acquire all of the 100-year renewable supply up front. And there is reference there. Laura had a question about costs, and that's right there in that third paragraph, the first full paragraph that you see on your screen, where it says costs of such supplies, is where we had a reference there. And then it looks like Jake and then Doug have a comment.
Thanks, Warren. I'm going to kind of follow along with Rob's comment that it seems kind of general and broad brush. And I just wanted to point out, we ask what are the roadblocks to prevent renewable supplies and infrastructure? And then we go down and say, the challenge is to getting renewable supplies. Like, we don't actually discuss those. And I would say that the infrastructure, local infrastructure, lack of regional planning, outside of individual providers that we do see prevalent in other states are some of those issues that prevent those renewable water supplies for getting to those groundwater dependent places. So I do think there could be more collaboration, but again, that might be getting into solutions, but the problem side of that is a lack of collaboration between providers and developers, not between individual providers and individual developers. I mean, providers across the suite and developers and growth as a component of that, because we are talking about that. And then lastly, it's one of the primary challenges is the lack of renewable supplies, and I would kind of argue against that in just a big broad brush stroke, and just challenge everybody to think about this a little bit differently. DWR has been citing for 5 years or so now that we're using the same amount of water we did in 1957. We've seen tremendous amount of growth, and we've just seen a redirection of those water supplies. And you can go back, decades before that. We were not using our entire cap allocation or our entire Colorado River allocation. Another state was. So I mean, it's been one compounding redirection over another. By and large, municipal development has seen agricultural water redirected to it. The greater Phoenix area and AMWA providers have benefited from that greatly through the SRP supplies that they now access. So I think we're looking at and thinking about this different. I know we often think about the recent transfers by Queen Creek as being hard, but and maybe I'm going to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole here, but we had a lot of comments and there was a lot of consternation for our time. Before our time, there was Plan 6. How much was around that in Orm Dam, around the Cap Canal, for that matter? I mean, I would say we're working within relatively well-established and well-accepted statutes and policies that are functioning. Queen Creek, can be looked at as an example of difficulty, but I'll have to agree with Rob. Ultimately, it's going to be seen as a success, so there is a limited amount of renewable supplies out there, but I think just citing it broad brush like this is not going to help us along our journey of addressing these as roadblocks to fix it. Because we're just going to say lack of renewable supplies. I mean, we're just going to say, oh, there is no, climate change. There's no more renewable supplies being made, right? But it's really the lack of access to existing renewable supplies that we need to talk about. So with that, I'll stop my rambling and thank you, Warren. Thanks,
No, thank you, Jake. I guess I would just add, and then I know there's more comments that want to be mentioned. We had tried to put together a laundry list of issues that had been raised by various folks throughout the committee. This is meant to be then the jumping off point to then get into deeper discussions and look at them. It's if we need to remove the reference about Queen Creek, we can do that. It's, we have the different little data or points in there because we were encouraged to include that, but those seem to have different perspectives, and which is fine. But one thing we can do is we could delete the last paragraph and reference about Queen Creek. But again, the list there in the paragraph, the full paragraph, the first full paragraph that you see on your screen is meant to just include all the different challenges that are out there, whether there's with supplies available or not available. And so let me turn to the comments.
Michael Curtis, you cannot ignore the phenomena of Queen Creek. It cannot be ignored. So I don't think you ought to delete it. It just cannot be ignored, and you don't have to elaborate on it. It just can't be ignored.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. Cynthia Campbell has a comment, and then as she's getting online, I'll just read a couple more. If something is not, this is from Kathy Ferris, if something is not mentioned in this paper, is it off the table for future discussions? No. I thought we were just setting the stage for the real meat of the discussions. Sandy says, I would also identify land ownership, the vast amounts of federal land in inhibiting infrastructure and renewable water supply development. And Haley Paul said, unfortunately, oh, I have to go, but I wanted to express my appreciation for the work on these briefs and looking forward to moving these issues to the full Governor's Water Council. These are critical issues to further flesh out and discuss in the next stage as we turn towards potential solutions. In the face of climate change and continued withdrawals of groundwater over what we replenish, we must advance our water policies. And Dave Roberts agreed with Kathy's comment. Let's just set these aside and keep track of them for discussion during the next phase for this work. Cynthia, you had a comment, and are you on?
Hear me now?
Now we can.
Okay, sorry. My Bluetooth was working to hear, but evidently not speak. You know, I think that you made a choice about how to write this paragraph. And I think the point you're trying to make, as I'm reading it, is not necessarily to point solely to the issue of Queen Creek or anybody else for that matter. Other than that, you're really just trying to say, look, getting renewable supplies is not going to be any easier. And I think that point is well taken. And I would agree with Jake, but for the fact that if we were talking about just additional renewable supplies for people who don't have them, I think I would agree with him. But I think the future that we're looking at is not that future. I think we're looking at a future where parties who already have renewable supplies right now are losing them to shortage and drought. And so those parties are also going to be looking for potentially additional renewable supplies. So there's going to be additional competition, driving that price up, making it more difficult, making it more difficult for enough renewable supplies to go around. Now, I wouldn't suggest making changes to the text of this paragraph, because again, I think your point is taken. It's going to be harder to get renewable supplies in the future. And it's not an issue of collaboration alone. It's not an issue of infrastructure alone. It's an issue of how much water is available. So I think you make that point. So I would leave it alone. I mean, I think Queen Creek is a very current situation, and it's an illustration. It's not necessarily a commentary on their particular struggle. It's an illustration, and it's an accurate illustration. It's difficult to get renewable supplies. So anyway, that's just my comment.
Thank you. I apologize, Doug. You had a comment, and I unfortunately skipped over you. So Doug, and then Ron Doba.
That's okay, Warren. It's like talking to my kids. They ignore me too. I just wanted to follow on with what Rod and Jake said. I think this needs to also include an infrastructure, because we both see from both in the private sector as well as the public sector, cities do have certain amount of renewable supplies, but they're not able to bring them to bear because of infrastructure restrictions. And then lastly, there was the statement in there of the no designations in the Phoenix AMA post 1999. I'm not sure that statement's correct, because I remember, again, this is just my memory, but my memory was that our Santan system, formerly Johnson, was actually originally designated in the mid-2000s. So maybe we need to check on that little factoid as well.
Okay, and Doug, just to point out in the paragraph, it does say obstacles to accessing infrastructure to move renewable supplies. And
Okay.
and then, you know, I guess to some degree, when we talk about institutional structure, that kind of gets at the point that Jake was making earlier about lack of organization or cooperation or collaboration. And that's, you know, certainly also something that could be discussed as we look at strategies on how to address this moving forward. Ron Dova?
Thanks, Warren. I just had a general comment from NAMWA. As you know, some of our members are in the Prescott AMA. I know that the City of Prescott Council is going to be discussing the assured water supply issue paper, but that hasn't come into fruition yet. That's scheduled, I believe, for the future. I circulated the issue paper amongst our members who were in the EMA. They did not have any specific wording changes that they indicated they would like to see in the issue paper. I don't know if anything is going to result from Prescott's discussion or not, but I think we still have an opportunity as this moves on to the GWAC to continue the discussion on some of these items. Generally, I think we would just like to see this paper in particular move on to the GWAC.
Thank you, Ron. Appreciate that. Jake, you had a follow-up thought or comment?
Yeah, I did just want to say, I do believe there are a lot of renewable supplies out there going underutilized or unutilized by lots of folks. And of course, there are willing sellers out there as well. But I also want to point out part of the problem that we hadn't talked about. And I think if those people knew we're meeting about, you know, the lack of renewable supplies in groundwater depletion areas, they'd probably like us to think about this. There are people in the AMAs that haul water today because of existing groundwater problems. And I think some of that can be solved by infrastructure. And I know it's a little bit outside of the scope of this, but to the extent that we're going to continue to work on this, I wanted to bring it up and put a pin in it, because I think there's some real problem areas inside the EMAs that we can talk about today, not even post 2025. So thanks for letting me mention that one.
Okay. Yep, there are certainly a number of challenges, and we're just trying to say we need to be working on these challenges by putting these issues forward and acknowledging that we've got issues. It was, you know, a lot of it is the Goldilocks principle of how general should it be and how detailed should it be, and finding the right just the right amount. Any other we can take the thoughts that we've gotten on this, see if we can make a few little more tweaks on it, but I also acknowledge the comments that were made saying that these look like they're okay to go and would be fine to move forward to the Governor's Water Council. So with that, should we go now to the easier paper on dealing with the GRD?
Easier is always best.
Wanted to save that for the end, make it easy. Here you, and again, really appreciate everyone bearing through this. I really wish we could all just be in one big giant room. I don't know if we could sit. We'd have the challenge of getting 112 people around the table, but appreciate everyone working through this. So to move on to the CAGRD replenishment and water supplies issue brief, we did our best to incorporate the different suggestions we received. And while we believe the brief reflects the different perspectives we heard, we will admit we gave deference to comments that we received from CAP due to their experience and knowledge in overseeing the CAGRD. So here, if you're looking at the issue statement and at the third question of the issue statement, we modified it per CAP's suggestion that the initial wording was soliciting ideas on specific improvements to the plan or ADWR's oversight of the CAGRD. The new wording is consistent with the other questions by focusing now on identifying the issue. So that's what we were trying to do there. So if we move to the first paragraph of the background section, updates were made to properly distinguish the CAGRD membership, distinguish that CAGRD membership demonstrates one of the assured water supply criteria, which allows the use of groundwater for new developments, but that the CAGRD itself does not allow development on groundwater. We also simplified the language on renewables, renewable supplies, and infrastructure. Any comments or suggestions here? So, Jessica, let's go ahead and look at the second page. So on the second page, in the first paragraph, we moved language about the member service areas up into the first paragraph, and again clarified that GRD membership may be utilized when applying for a certificate of assured water supply, along with showing a groundwater supply that meets other assured water supply criteria. Finally, we added a sentence suggested in the comments that we received to note that CAGRD's obligation stems from the reported excess groundwater use of its members, but it must also plan for the projected build-out obligation of its members. And then looking at the bottom paragraph on this page, again, these were meant, are hopefully technical corrections to help better align the language in the brief with the statutory requirements of the CAGRD. And small technical modifications really cover most of the remaining changes to the background section, though we admit it is a lengthy background section. Although they were not all substantive changes, we really tried our best to integrate all the suggested edits, whether they be big or small, from committee members, and those can be seen in the remaining background paragraphs. So any comments or suggestions regarding the background section? David Godleski has a comment. Sorry, David.
Hey, Warren. David Godleski, Saba. We've been an active participant and contributor in this and recognize the difficulty in balancing all the comments. Certainly appreciate your work and Tim's. I guess one of the things from our perspective, I mean, this paper seems to be framed as the GRD is really a problem that needs to be solved. And I think in the initial questions, it's really presupposing uncertainties, issues, concerns, and there's just kind of a general lack or depth of analysis in pushing into the issues. And I think there probably are some issues with GRD where improvements can be made, and certainly things can be fine tuned. But GRD has really been a solution to some of the problems that we talked about in the earlier paper, and growth or groundwater pumping that's not being replenished. And I think it's worked. I think it's worked well. And I don't feel like that just kind of the general tone in framework of the paper really addresses the positives. And looking at the GRD as something that has worked. It's helped in many instances. And so while there may be problems, let's really focus on what those are and figure out ways to do things better and enhance it, and not just trying to to solve things. So I think that was something that we tried to emphasize in our comments was just in a large degree about the tone and how GRD was being characterized.
Well, Tim may want to add to this. We certainly have tried our best to make sure that the tone of the paper was neither overtly positive as well as definitely not negative, and but just to be as straightforward and succinct and objective as possible. I guess it would be helpful to us and to the rest of the committee if you could point out any specific verbiage. But when we worked on the issue statement, one of the things that we did at the December meeting as we were all working on it was to really try to focus and narrow in on what we're specifically talking about to our to the GRD. And so that's why the issue statement is focused on related to renewable supplies that are needed for the to meet its replenishment obligations. And we did appreciate the written comments that were given. I believe that I mean, we could actually try to go through the comments that you gave us, and I think you would find that a number of the comments we did incorporate and try to make the comments so that it was not seen as anything negative about the GRD. And especially we worked hard to make sure, or we thought we accomplished that it was not providing any dispersion upon how the GRD is currently operating, because there's no need for that. It is operating quite well right now. So I guess, and I apologize, I'm kind of missing on some of the chats here. It looks like Jake wanted to comment. Spencer agrees with David's comments, as well as Rob and Doug. And so I guess, again, I guess I also wonder from the rest of the committee of, I guess I'm struggling with what we need to do to make this brief to be more objective than it is right now. Is there anything factually or legally not stated here, or is that's incorrect? Anyway, so Jake, I think you wanted to comment.
Yeah, I can just a general comment. I do think there are a lot of positive things here. You know, without the GRD, we probably wouldn't have the same assured water supply program that we had, you know, drafted right on the eve of the GRD's creation. I honestly don't think it would have lasted. And you look in the states surrounding us, there's nothing that comes close to what we do here. And I think the GRD is the single most successful factor in keeping the assured water supply program together. I mean, being able to have a level playing field amongst landowners across the state has, and that's happened because of the GRD, has allowed the assured water supply rules to stay largely intact and doing exactly what they need to be doing, proving a 100-year assured water supply. And it's working. It really is working. I mean, we have an issue in Pinal, and that stopped things. And DWR is doing that and working on that. It's going to come up on 6 years since their latest, since their last determination of assured water supply issuance in Pinal. So I just feel that maybe some recognition of that and understanding and refocusing it on, we need to make sure the GRD stays strong, can continue to get enrollment and continue to replenish the aquifer. I really feel like there's a focus that it needs to be hampered. If I read this paper, I feel like I'm reading it and it's saying the GRD needs to be hampered. And you know, I'd be more than happy to provide written comments. Again, I'm sorry I didn't do it before this meeting or before time to incorporate it, but I do think we can put a little more recognition into the positive things it's done. And as we get through this paper, I'll have a couple other thoughts. I think there might be some facts later on in the paper that might be misleading. Thanks, Warren. And by the way, really appreciate the work on this. I know this is a very difficult subject, and
Yeah.
thank you for taking the time to continue to work on this.
I guess, again, looking at the statements, I'm just having a hard time seeing what is negative. We point out in the paper all the since the paper is focused on water supplies, and again, the issue statement itself says that the GRD says right up front in the issue statement, the GRD provides a mechanism to replenish some of the assured water supply related groundwater use within 3 active management areas. However, the CAGRD and its members face long-term uncertainties related to the availability and cost of renewable supplies for replenishment. As we walk through the paper, we highlight all the different things that the GRD has done to work on reducing uncertainties about availability and cost of renewable supplies, and point out that, but still acknowledging that that's still an issue that needs to be worked on. At least that's what we understood from CAGRD and other members regarding it. And so I don't know if Laura, if you might want to comment on that general thought. Kathy Ferris has a comment, and then Rob has a comment, and Cliff Neal just wrote, while the original draft seemed to point to the GRD as being a big problem, the revisions are much more objective and positive. And Simone just also wrote, the paper seems very objective.
Well, thanks, Warren. You know, CAGRD appreciates the work that the co-chairs have done with us and with ADWR. I know these issues are very complex, and I think that you're doing a great job at trying to provide as many perspectives in the issue brief as you can. I think that is the objective of the issue briefs is identifying the issues and providing the perspectives. In this case, obviously, there are a lot of perspectives, and in some cases, they are conflicting. So I think that is a really big challenge. I agree that from what we had originally when these two issues with CAGRD and the assured water supply were connected, the draft issue, I think we call it outline. I think progress. And each version and draft, I think, has gotten stronger. And then when we separated the issues out based on our discussion at the December meeting. So I think each time we've worked to incorporate a number of comments, we've gotten stronger issue briefs. And I appreciate the changes that were made based on our comments about trying to not infer solutions in the issue paper itself, in the issue brief itself. So I appreciate that. I agree that there are some concerns that folks have with supply costs and uncertainty. These are not new issues. The issue brief does a good job outlining that these issues have been around almost since the inception of the GRD, and that there has been a lot of statutory changes in board rates and bonding authority to alleviate, mitigate some of the uncertainty of that future. But like I said, I think the brief continues to get better, and any way that we'll be able to incorporate any additional perspectives that we've been hearing today could probably make it even stronger. But appreciate the work that you've done with us on trying to get this as accurate as we can before we move to the next phase.
Thank you, Laura. I think I know next we'll have Kathy give a comment, and then Rob.
Thank you, and Laura, those were great comments. And I think that says a lot for this paper to have Laura, who is charged with implementing this program, to say that she thinks it's come a long way. I do too, because I was concerned at first that things were misstated, that they weren't an accurate reflection of the law. And so if this paper doesn't have legal or factual issues, if it's a report about what the law and the facts currently are, I think that's where we should be. Clearly, this is a very controversial issue with a number of people. And while I don't think this paper should beat up Cagrd, I also don't think it should glorify Cagrd. That's not the point here. The point is to be factually and legally honest. Some of us go back before Cagrd in our experience with the assured water supply requirement, and we all have different perspectives on it. So I'd like to see us just stay focused on keeping this straightforward, legally and factually correct. I think you've done a really good job of that, and I support moving it forward to I don't know how you pronounce it, GWACI, whatever that group is that I'm on. I support moving it forward. Thanks.
Rob, you have a comment, and then Bill Garfield has a comment.
Until Kathy's last point, can we agree that the pronunciation is G-Wake? Can we have a motion to that effect? I want to make three comments, and I'll try to be brief on all three. One is related to what consensus we're trying to reach here. The second one is the progress that has been made. And then the third one is I just want to touch on an example of an issue that I think is missing from here. That's not inaccurate, but is missing and is not fully explained. So let me start with what we're trying to reach in terms of consensus. These are issue papers, concerns, problems. So we're asked to say that there's a consensus, and this is where much of our comments are coming from. These are stated in a very general way, and it's not clear exactly what we're agreeing about. I don't think that it's fair to say that there's consensus in the group about what the problems are. Now, if we agree as a group that, no, these are general statements of kind of what some of the issues that are out there, as opposed to agreeing that they're problems, then it becomes easier to reach a consensus. But that's kind of the point where we're sort of backing up is, are we agreeing that something is a problem that requires a solution? And I'll just leave that there. In terms of progress, I do believe that that there's been significant progress here. And I actually agree with Kathy, and I agree with Laura's statements on this, and I see what Cliff had put in here. I do think that there's a much more in-depth discussion of the complexity of CAGRD and how it works. So we appreciate that. And I hope that my comments today haven't been taken as something that somehow doesn't recognize that, because I think it's important to recognize that. The third thing, though, is I want to just get into an example of where I think the paper falls short, and I don't have the drafting for this. We provided language, and while I appreciate what you're saying, like Warren, about accepting language, a lot of it hasn't been accepted. But one issue is let's just call it GRD going off a cliff. There's a sentence there on the page we're staring at where we say GRD continues to acquire supplies and build a portfolio that projects it'll have enough water through 2050. Warren and I had a chance to talk about this very briefly, and Warren viewed that as, hey, wait, that's positive. That's 30 years. We have 30 years that we've solved. I read it as we have a cliff in 2050 that we're going to drive off of. And the paper doesn't really get to this point, and it's a nuanced point, but it's that, yeah, there's a whole bunch of allocations of groundwater in the Pinal and in the Phoenix AMA and in the Tucson AMA. There's a whole bunch of allocations of groundwater. But if GRD is really having problems, really getting and meeting its obligations, many of those projects will simply not be built or cannot be built under the current regulatory scheme. And examining that kind of interaction will show you that we're not looking at a cliff in 2050. Now, the paper doesn't say that there's a cliff there, but that nuance of this doesn't all, we don't stop operating GRD today and just see what happens in 30 years. It will continue to operate. And if it can't, if the problems with acquiring renewable supplies, the system is already built in with existing breaks. And that explanation would have been very helpful in here. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
No, Rob, that's a good point. And we tried to put some of those points about the breaks as far as with the plan of operation in the plan of operation, where we were talking specifically there on that. But let's see, Bill Garfield, you had a comment?
Yes, thank you, Warren. Bill Garfield here. First off, I haven't said a whole lot during today's meeting, and that's very unlike me to not say something. But first, I wanted to make note that I believe the revisions to these drafts have come a long way. And I'd like to commend both of the two co-chairs, DWR staffs, the CIGRD staff, and others who have worked so hard to get these drafts where they are today. I believe that these two issue briefs probably represent two of the most impactful, potentially impactful, and difficult areas to discuss as we start tackling some of these issues in the months and years ahead. And so I believe that these drafts have advanced to the point where they should be submitted to the GWAKE at its next meeting, and perhaps with some of the minor revisions that were discussed today to clarify some of these things, Warren. But I believe the work has come a long way, and with the understanding that as we roll up our sleeves and really start talking about some of these areas in greater depth, as we start tackling some of these areas, that if we see areas that need to be refined in some way, or even if we find areas that we hadn't thought about but that are critical for either of these areas in the post-2025 era, I believe that we should be able to do that, and I think we are ready to do that. So those are my comments, Warren.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Bill. Any other comments? I guess just one thing to just throw out there with these briefs, and particularly these two, as Bill noted, these have been the challenging ones. We're just trying to say there are issues that need to continue to be worked on. I think Arizona, we all collectively as the Arizona water community or Arizona water family, and we are definitely trying to put the fun back into dysfunctional when we talk about family, but we, as a family, as a water community, we are certainly always have been looking at how to keep improving things. And what we have a long record of that ever since the Groundwater Management Act was passed. And we've been trying to take the opportunity that the governor that was given to us through the Governor's Water Council to look at post-2025, what could be improved with the AMAs and with the issues. And I think having as an issue statement that the GRD and its members face long-term uncertainties related to the availability and cost of renewable supplies for replenishment is a factual statement. We try in the brief to point some of the concerns that are there. Is it 100% complete? Probably not. Is it, could some things be said maybe a little better this way or that? Probably. Would we each write it in a different way? I'm sure of that. We've been doing our best to take comments from all of the committee members to work through and try to put together a paper that captures or best describes the issue statements and just gives a description for the purpose, as Bill pointed out and others have pointed out, so that we can then start looking to see what strategies we can come up with to improve. The objective is, as I mean, it says here in the paper at the end of the background section, and however, with the expectation of increased competition for limited supplies, rising acquisition costs, increased growth using groundwater supplies requiring replenishment, and the growing risk of Colorado River shortages, which not just the GRD is facing, we're all dealing with, it remains important to continue to take steps to mitigate this uncertainty to ensure the viability of the CAGRD. And I know that's what Tim and I's perspective has been on this view is our objective, and we believe that of the whole committee, is we want to see the CAGRD as well as the Assured Water Supply Program to be able to be as viable as possible for many generations to come. And that's what we're just trying to work on here. I will now let Sharon Megdal make a comment.
Hi, thanks, Warren. And I have a general comment and then a specific comment about a wording that's bothered me a little bit. And that is, I do find this discussion today particularly encouraging because I see real convergence on agreeing on description of the issue. That's the easy part, actually. The harder part's going to come down the road. So like, let's get this done and then deal with the real hard part of coming up with possible solutions and so forth in the next phase. So I just want to say, I think you've done a really great job. And I think this last discussion is quite encouraging. I just want to note, this is a little bit of a picky thing, but I'm just going to put it there. You don't have to make any changes in wording. But it talks about the uncertainty and the cost of renewable supplies for replenishment.
Uh-oh.
Sharon, I think, oh, she's spinning.
Yeah. Okay. Wasn't sure if it was me or Sharon. So since
Sharon.
Tim, you're there, it must be Sharon. So we'll wait for Sharon to be able to rejoin, but if it's okay, why don't we just try to go through the remainder part of this paper and see if there's any additional comments as we're talking the issue description part. So as Jessica's moving that down, so under the question 1 of the issue description, the changes that we made all were small clarifications or rewording, but the language is substantially the same. A little bit further, Jessica, if you can, but we certainly would welcome any suggestions or comments. And
Hey, Warren, I think I'm back. I'm really sorry it got dropped off. I don't know why that happened, but I stopped my camera. Did you hear anything I said?
no, you were just starting to talk about, but we were wondering, it would be helpful if you could specify so that all of us following along, are you referring to the GRD issue brief? And if so, what page you're looking at?
Yes, I'm only talking about the issue brief.
Thank you.
So did you hear what I said about, I thought this was all good and I'm encouraged, and let's get to the hard work. The
Yes.
wording change I have is actually on the issue statement itself on page 1.
Okay.
And it talks about the issue being the bullet point 1 or whatever. What are the long-term uncertainties related to the availability of renewable supplies, or even above that, where it says the availability and cost of renewable supplies? And my point is, not all supplies that are eligible to be used by the GRD are necessarily renewable. And so somewhere, I think maybe even in that very early sentence, I question whether the word renewable has to always be there in terms of replenishment supplies. So that's my question. You can take it for what it's worth, but it's something I've questioned since the very earliest statements when the 2 issue papers were combined. So, because for example, Harquahela groundwater is not eligible to be used for replenishment. It's not a renewable supply. That's my point.
Okay. And I guess I would defer to Laura, since I think, if I recall correctly, CAP had encouraged the use, CAP staff had encouraged the use of the word renewable.
Laura had
that's a good point, Sharon. So
no, I think we did have the same concern originally. I think one of the drafts we crossed out when we had renewable supplies to replace it with replenishment supplies, because we have the ability to use long-term storage credits, Harquahela groundwater. So I think that's a great suggestion.
Okay. Well, we can, unless anyone has a concern with that, we'll just do that. I see a thumbs up from Tim. I'm hoping. So,
and Lauren, I just want to clarify. I don't have a problem with using the recognizing that the supplies are intended to be renewable by and large. My main point is it's not only renewable. So if there's a way to represent that, that's my recommendation.
okay. We'll also see if maybe we can put a little clarification with in footnote.
And Warren, I just was going to say, if Laura disagreed with me, I was going to say, look what happens when you're no longer the chair of her committee, right?
Well, I'm glad there was agreement still. So looking at the, going back down into the paper, looking at the issue description, Jessica, are you able to keep that moving down to page Oh, Jessica is pointing out the footnote here that says, except as provided by Title 45, Chapter 3.1, the district may replenish groundwater with Central Arizona Project water or water from any other lawfully available source except groundwater withdrawn from within an active management area. So, thank you, Jessica, for pointing that out. And so if we look at the second question, under the second question, we added a suggested sentence on how member service area providers recoup CAGRD costs. We also, on the top of page 6, added detail suggested by CAP and others covering how the financial benefit of conserving water may be less apparent to CAGRD members who pay for renewable supplies through their property tax. There is also now a sentence acknowledging that smaller water providers may not have the resources available for water conservation, and privately owned water providers may need to limit conservation activities in order to obtain ACC approval on rates. Any comments or suggestions on this area? If Jake, let's see, we're seeing Eric likes it. Jake, you have a like or a comment?
Yeah, thanks, Warren. I like it a lot. I like these changes in the sense. I do want to point out that I think the CAGRD member lands are among the most conserving member lands, just as they're the newest stock of homes built. I think by and large, member homes and member lands have some of the lowest water use rates. So just a side note there. But I a little further down in a paragraph here, and I'm not trying to be contentious or fight. Just thinking through what the issues are and kind of going back to my early comments in the early meetings about being data driven. You know, in this middle paragraph here, we cite in here about the water acquisition GRD made with the Gila River Indian community. And that the board, there's a quote in here, a citation at the board, predicting rates will go up 11 to 15%. And the focal point turns to say, you know, although the actual rate increase was less than that, it was something like 5%, but it demonstrates that the board will most likely need to consider, you know, costly things. That's true, but if you look at the data, it was about, you know, 4 or 5% over a couple of years. So it's not a really costly one. I think most of the CAGRD's large cost increase came before this. But then if we also look at their projected rates, I think it's something like 1.5% per year, year over year in their projected rate schedule. So again, I'm not trying to say, you know, it needs to be worded this way or that way. It just seems like if there was balance, the balance was to say, where's the number that shows this really high rate increase and how can we cite that versus, you know, did we use data to derive a fact that we need to actually say, hey, these rates are so high, it's a real problem for homeowners. I mean, but $20 a month for a homeowner, you know, and by the way, I get that because I think the GRD rates are about, the usage by member lands are about a third of an acre foot. An acre foot is about $750 for replenishment. So $250 divided by 12 months, about $20 a month. So I do expect there to be potential long-term problems here. But I think, I don't think we're talking about it in a way that's balanced necessarily. So if we can reach in the data, then I think ultimately the data will help us find the right solutions when we get to those next hard steps. As Sharon said, these are the easy ones. When we get to the hard ones, If we're going at this without the data, we're going to disagree on solutions even more than this. So thanks again for letting me comment. I know I've commented a lot today.
What do you want to say? What do you want to say? What do you want to say? This is Michael Curtis. What do you want to say?
Hi, Michael Curtis. What would I say in this section? I would cite the actual rate increases versus a speculative statement that of rate increases that has happened in the past from now. And I would actually use the actual numbers and percent increase. And I think that provides a more factual based approach. You know, it's the objective to have open discussion. And I printed this off and I kept it on my desk. It's the Post-2025 AMA's committee objective sheet from the beginning, and it's to utilize data to define issues. And I'm not trying to, again, I don't really want to split hairs on every statement, but I really hope we can get back to the data now. So later when we get to the issues the solutions, we're focused on them in the right way, and we can agree on what those solutions are. So I'm sorry to ramble on about my same old thing. Let's look at the data, let's look at the facts, but I really think it'll be extra helpful in the future. Thank you, Warren. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, no, Jake, I appreciate that. You know, we've had, it's been a challenge putting in data. We have had data in the briefs and concerns that the data doesn't say the right thing. So then we've pulled it out. Earlier, there was the comment by Rob about 2050. We could have just said that they have enough, CAGRD has enough water through its plan of operation, which would be factual. We added the 2050 based on suggestions from CAP. And unfortunately, that data was viewed as that we viewed that it could be seen negatively. Here on this, you know, it's the point that we're trying to make is that expensive supply options will continue to be what is out there for the GRD. The facts and the data here is that the CAP board voted for this acquisition, and it was presented to them that it would create an 11 to 15% combined increase over the next 2 to 3 years. That's what the board voted on, and it's come in less than that afterwards, which is what we pointed on. But until we get a more, you know, and perhaps this is one of the areas where we can have a part of the strategy is having a more detailed analysis of cost impacts on its members done by CAP. But I'm just pointing it out, and I sure hope I'm not now sounding like I'm trying to be argumentative with you. It's just trying to clarify why that point was put in there, and we were trying to just to add that point in there. But you know, it's one of those things of it becomes a challenge to, you know, the points aren't always well taken by everybody, and we're trying to do that, or do our best. I know Tim is having to leave, but we would really like to continue getting through this, and we have a few things we wanted to talk about on next steps. So if folks can continue to hang in there, we would appreciate it. And then David, you have a comment on costs.
Yeah, and I think I just saw Kathleen's comment come through the chat, and I think that's something that I wanted to build upon. I know there's been a lot of work done by multiple parties with respect to things just like that of increasing the annual assessment rate, establishment of the replenishment reserve, bonding authority, increase in membership dues. Are there those types of examples related to things that have been done to help just, I guess, again, provide a little more color or context to this particular subject?
Yes. that was one of the reasons the background section is a little bit longer than other background sections, is because we did want to point out that there's been a concerted effort to be able to better obtain supplies and the reasons for that, which then does have an impact on costs. And so that's why in the brief we portrayed it the way we did, to try to provide that those facts that we were able to get, the information from Laura and her team to better describe the efforts that have been made so that to get renewable supplies, and they still do have an impact on costs, but we wanted to portray it in the way that was connected better with the description of what we were trying to describe with the issue statement. So I guess just if we look at the very last question, we again, Jessica, if you can. Yeah, right here, again, the question was changed according, so that it was not asking or suggesting a solution, but was but to identify concerns with the current GRD plan of operation or oversight by DWR. The answer here was brief already, and it remains brief. We continue to note the consequences of an inconsistent plan of operation, but also recognize that changes have been made to CHERD statutory duties over the years, is what we were trying to do there, but while still acknowledging that, hey, if there's room for improvement, we can still look at it. I'm sorry, Doug, you have a comment?
Yeah, Warren, thanks. Back on the cost section, this is one of the sections that I really have some pretty major problems with, just the question itself. And maybe this gets back to Rob's opening comment on there seems to be, whether it's not specifically factually exactly correct, there's just maybe an overall attitudinal approach to this. So I really like that. Being said, and I appreciate all the work you guys put into this to try to get all these desperate cats together. What is it? Herding cats uphill in the rainstorm at midnight. So I really like the section on the lack of connection between different member types and the water bill, as far as, because we all know that monetary stimulus or monetary pain does drive conservation, and that our tiered rate structures all reflect that. So having the GRD bill pop up in your property tax for member lands, there's really that disconnect, and I appreciate that being pointed out. Whereas through member service areas, that there's more of a direct connect on your monthly costs of how that flows through. So I really appreciate it, especially from a conservation standpoint. I think that's something that we can really take a strong look at. Now, the other piece of the cost question that I really sticks in my craw is that this somehow, the way that I read this, let me put it that way. The way that I read this is that somehow the GRD is going to be uniquely hammered on costs of water supplies in the future. This is something every single water provider is going to face. And I know we've had some statistics throw up on the screen of how much it's increased over the last few years. You can take the same approach to any water provider that was originally just pumping essentially free groundwater, and now because of assured water supply and all these other requirements we have to go through, we have to now bring in renewable supplies that are more expensive. If you bring in CAP and direct serve that, you have to build treatment plants, which is more expensive. And then, as we discussed on the last paper, Queen Creek having to go through the process of obtaining this. So it really bothers me that this is, somehow in the way I'm reading it, the GRD is going to be uniquely, horribly expensive, and nobody else is going to have to face this kind of cost increase. We're all going to face it. Renewable supplies are going to get more expensive, and they're going to be harder to get a hold of. And it's just the fact of life that water costs in Arizona are going to go up. Now, is the GRD horribly more inefficient than other ways to bring this together? Maybe that's the question, instead of just GRD is going to be more expensive. Yeah, it all is. So I'll stop rambling here and let folks get on with their lives.
Yeah. No, Doug, I appreciate that. I think as we were working on this issue brief, we were focusing in specifically on the GRD and getting its supplies. And when we were talking in the previous paper on the assured water supply, we noted the cost of water. But I appreciate what you're saying, and I guess maybe I'm wondering if we could try to rephrase or at least put in a caveat somewhere in here, noting that this is not just the point that you're making, that this is not just unique to the GRD, that like all others who are looking for additional supplies, the GRD is going to be faced with rising cost. I think the reason we were pointing it out, or maybe emphasizing it more so in this paper, is the GRD has that responsibility. It has that obligation that it must have the supply, be able to acquire the supplies. And so that's
Warren,
yeah.
I totally get that, but that responsibility falls on every single water provider out there. I mean, we can't do it Johnson Utilities and walk away, right? We have to bring in the infrastructure, we have to invest, we have to make sure it's the right quality, and we can't just abdicate that responsibility and move on. So again, like you said, this is not unique to the GRD. Every water provider out there has that same responsibility.
Okay, I'll let Eric comment.
Thanks. I agree to some degree with Doug that the renewables increasing costs in the future is not unique to the GRD. I think that what is unique to the GRD is the cost allocation method of acquiring those supplies, which is very different from a designated provider that must have those supplies in hand before the development occurs. And so therefore we acquire those supplies at some great cost, and then we utilize a system development fee when the development is built to repay for those costs. And the GRD has made some changes to their fee structure, which are very generously noted in the paper. The increase in the enrollment fees, the upfront costs, which do not put them on par with the system development fees in my community, just for the water supply acquisition. So there has been strides made to make that a little bit better, but because they are not to that level where the water supply can actually be acquired based on that upfront cost, now the water supply is acquired on the back of the ratepayer after the fact. And so that is unique to the GRD. I think it's worth pointing out I don't know that there's a solution to that, but I think it's worth pointing out in the paper, and maybe somebody has a great solution when we get to that point. But it is a difference, and I think it's one that the homeowners that reside in those areas have to deal with, and it could be a problem in the future that needs to get dealt with.
Rob, you had a comment to that, or an additional comment?
Yeah, I'll be really short here. I do want to say that I find that the cost discussion is a very frustrating one. Having spent the last maybe 10 years discussing fees at GRD and making numerous compromises on improving the financial structure of CAGRD and the complexities of doing that, it's very difficult to get any of that, fully addressed in a paper like this in a manner that would lay the groundwork for, I don't know what solutions is this group going to come up with, given the complexities that we deal with when it comes to the CAGRD rate setting. But set that aside for a second. I don't disagree with anything that Eric just said. I would just simply point out that much of the GRD is operating in the world in which most of what's happening is it's new growth required to get new water supplies. In the old world, where there were large CAP allocations available, municipal providers had that supply of water and then was allowed to grow into it. That was a much less expensive world. While it was expensive on its own, it was still much less expensive than the situation we're going into. And the current GRD structure is set up in a way that is least expensive for the homeowner. If you turn it around and you make a builder come in and buy all the water that's necessary for 1 or 2 years up front, that cost is going to be borne in the cost of housing, and it's going to be more expensive than the current structure. There isn't room in this paper to discuss that kind of an issue with any kind of a complexity or analysis. And I guess that's my general frustration with getting into cost here. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Right. Thanks, Rob. Warren had to step away very briefly and ask that I take the helm. So obviously, the issue of cost for GRD is, it's complex. We're just giving an overview here. And I think that it stands as something that, could merit a deeper dive as we move forward and start to look at potential strategies and solutions in the future. But I recognize, and I think Warren recognizes what everybody is trying to get across here. And I think in the interest of time, we should probably move on. Warren, I think we've kind of covered the cost issue.
Okay. Yeah, I think I agree that we can put in a explanation or note that this is not just unique for the CAGRD, but and so we appreciate the comments, and we'll find a way to work that in and put that in.
Warren, whose job is it going to be? This is Mike Curtis. Whose job is it going to be to do the deeper dive? This group or the group that you're referring this report to?
Oh, it comes back to us.
Yeah. What we're and Michael, that's a really good segue. I'm going to go ahead and use it. What we're wanting to do is we want to present these issues and the issue briefs to the Governor's Water Council. And talk about it with them. And what we really are hoping to do is that they will concur that these are issues that provide an opportunity for us to look at how to develop strategies or solutions that could help improve overall groundwater management in the AMAs. And so, and then with their support, we anticipate that then we will be the group that will start working on developing strategies and solutions. And so when we present this, when Tim and I give the progress report, we intend to go through each of the issue briefs. We'll make sure that they have the issue briefs. The full Governor's Water Council will have all of the issue briefs. Prior to the meeting, we will give a presentation about it, and we're hoping that we'll then get their support. And when we do give the presentation to the Governor's Water Council, we will be emphasizing that while there's 6 issues that have been identified, and there are 6 separate issue briefs, that we understand that these issues are interrelated and connected. And so it's quite possible, if not more than likely, that the solutions and strategies the committee will then develop will address one or more of the issues. And so that's what we're hoping to do. And that's what our intent is to do with the presentation to the Governor's Water Council. And again, as I said earlier, I see this all as part of the process of the tradition or the legacy that Arizona has of continually looking at how can we make improvements to our groundwater management. Why would we make improvements? Why are we doing that? Because we all collectively know that if we continue to improve how we manage our water, we're certainly better situating ourselves as communities and for our economies. And so what we would hope to do is after the Governor's Water Council meeting, and assuming that they give us a thumbs up, that we would reconvene in early April and get started looking at strategies and solutions. We are looking at, Tim and I have been talking about and working with ADWR on what are the best way to kick off that solution phase and or strategy phase so that we can generate the best opportunity for all of you to contribute. We would like you to start thinking about strategies, different ideas. All ideas are welcome, whether it be low-hanging fruit or aiming for the stars. But we want to encourage there to be thinking outside of the box. And are we going to be able to solve every single thing that's out there? No, but we'll see what we generate as a group and see what we can then work on. And again, it's an opportunity for us to work on these issues and challenges so that we can improve groundwater management in the AMAs to ensure the continued strength of the economy and well-being of all citizens far beyond 2025. And it looks like there was some, I don't know if I need to respond to what's just occurred in the chat room. So leave that there, but I'm glad to be glad to answer any questions regarding next steps and what we're hoping to do with the presentation to the Governor's Water Council. And anything that's too hard, I'll defer to Tim, who's not here. Tim unfortunately had to leave for he had a a firm commitment at 3:00, and I appreciate everyone else hanging on.
Hey, Warren, it's David Godleski again.
Yes, David.
We're going to be circulating a final draft before it goes to the council. And can you talk a little bit, we've talked about consensus. Is the assumption that through today's meeting that consensus has been reached, or what, how is this going to be, conveyed to the full council?
Well, I guess there's a number of ways we can convey it. I guess the main thing is we've been working on these issues since all through 2020. We are presenting them as issues that the committee has been working on, that we feel that there's general sentiment, consensus that we identified that these are issues that can be improved on, and that we can look at developing strategies. If there are strong opinions against that, then I think we certainly want to point that out and make sure that that's conveyed, or have it conveyed during the Governor's Water Council. I mean, ultimately, this is the way Tim and I have understood, this is ultimately up to the Governor's Water Council. We're just doing all the grunt work.
Warren, if I might, so you heard a lot of concerns raised about and most of the concerns that we raised, and a number of others did, were that there wasn't enough discussion, there wasn't enough of a deep dive, there wasn't enough of this, there wasn't enough of that. And some of the responses that I heard to that was, well, there will be time for us to do that. It would strike me that maybe if we could articulate those when it goes up to the committee, that would lay the groundwork for when we get into the next phase to actually wrestle with those issues. And I don't know which of them we would actually wrestle with, but it would just allow us to kind of say, hey, these are our concerns going forward in terms of developing solutions. And that would help, I think, the committee in the future work through or develop solutions. I guess what I'm saying is I'm not saying that we come to the committee and say this paper's all wrong, because it's not. There's a lot of stuff in this paper that's good. It's right. It's on point. But that our concerns about things not being in there, not being addressed, that we could articulate those, and that would help provide some structure for moving forward.
Hey, Warren, I just wanted to agree with that and say, from my point, you could just call me Mr. Data today. That we articulate that we're going to dive into some of that data as well, as I think it'll help us find solutions, because it'll paint an obvious picture.
No, that's a good point. So I guess I'd like to just go ahead and throw out there, are there any, I know there's been various comments throughout the meeting of different folks saying that they feel good about the papers going forward. Others have expressed some concerns on them. Are there any other thoughts out there? And
Warren, I'll make a comment.
Thanks.
Sure. So my thought here is that I understand there's not complete agreement on everything, that some would like the tone to be a little different in one direction or another direction on these issues, or maybe present information in a somewhat different way, or include more data or less data. But I think as long as we've gotten to a point where we can generally agree that there's nothing inaccurate, technically wrong stated in these papers, that we've generally captured the idea, my sense in working with this committee over all these past months is that there is general agreement that these are opportunities where we may be able to find ways to strengthen water management moving forward. And that was really what we were trying to do, was to identify those places where we might have opportunities and to have this kind of discussion so that we could come to at least a more thorough understanding of where we're all at and what our thinking is, just as a launch point to move forward into that next phase where we're going to have to do the harder work, as it's been said. So I think we could say that we have general consensus around these briefs, and I feel that we're in a pretty good place to move these forward to the council at this point. That we've had a lot of discussion, a lot of input, and I feel that it's been very valuable, and it's a starting point for where we're going next.
Bill.
Thank you, Warren. Bill Garfield. We can all think about the council as the council's going to decide this and the council's going to decide that. But really, this committee is really where the rubber's going to meet the road. They're going to rely very heavily upon us, and they may give some general direction, but where we're going to be digging into the weeds, we're looking at the people who are the weed diggers right here on the screen. And whatever depth of whatever discussion are going to take place are really within the people involved here today in that group, and not the council. I know they're the council, and I'm on the council, but I don't think they're gonna dig into the nitty gritty on what we're going to be doing.
Yeah, and I think it's just important to recognize, as we're working through, at least how Tim and I have seen it, is as we're working through on these strategies, are developing solutions. It's what everyone feels can actually move forward. But I do agree that among all the folks that are here on this in this meeting, in this group, we've got the knowledge, we've got the wherewithal to come up with ideas, and we can get the data if we need to from DWR and such. But this was mainly just to provide us the focus of, here are 6 issues that we should work on. They are interconnected, and how do we make improvements going forward? And I look forward to a lot more. I'm going to be positive and think that the next stage is going to be much easier than this first stage. But and then because we'll be working all together to try to see what we can do to improve things. And so that's how I like to look at how it'll be. But it will be work. So, any other general thoughts, comments, suggestions? Again, appreciate everyone hanging on and taking a little bit longer for this meeting. Yes.
Sorry, I know I should use the chat function. I keep forgetting to. I just, on the consensus thing, I'm not sure exactly where we're leaving that. I appreciate what Carol is saying. I can't say that we agree that there's consensus. And I guess I'd like to articulate that better. And we're out of time here today, so I don't think it's the time to do that. But I can't let this. Again, we think that there's more to be discussed in these issues before we have a real idea what anyway, I'm starting to talk again, but I just have to carve that out. I don't think we agree that there's consensus, but we look forward to what you present at the committee. So I'll just leave it at that.
Well, and I will just throw out there, Rob, or to anyone else, if there's I'm happy to talk. We're happy to continue to understand what is the concern that might still be there. I will say just I don't know if this is the issue or not. I don't know if it's more about process or about how we've been approaching it, and whether there's concerns about the next phase of the solution and strategy, that somehow something's going to just that suddenly things all fall together and something's rammed through. That's certainly I don't see it that way. I don't see it possible that way.
It's really, Warren, it's really not more complicated than the comments you heard from us today. It's really not any more complicated than that. It's basically the papers as written. We're not saying that they're inaccurate. We're not saying that they paint a false picture. What we're saying is that without more detail, to say that the papers themselves identify issues that merit solutions, that require solutions. We can't go that far. That's all.
Okay. So
if we want to, we want to move into the next phase, we can move to the next phase. But I don't want to get to the next phase and have somebody say, well, you agreed that this was an issue, so why won't you agree that that we need a solution? Because we didn't agree on the issues at a level that allow us to say, yes, that merits a solution. That's all.
well, I appreciate that, and we're struggling also, are wrestling with the fact that we've got others that are okay with how the paper's presented and such. So anyway, as I said, I'm happy to continue to discuss it and have conversations on the side. So
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Kathy just asked a question, Warren, in the chat.
I'm sorry, Carol, I didn't hear what you said.
Okay, we've got a couple comments in the chat that, there's Doug echoed Rob's statement. Bill may have another comment, I think. Kathy said, isn't there at least consensus to take these papers, even if some believe they are flawed, to the full council? I mean, is there anybody who wants to, I guess another way to ask Kathy's question is there anybody that is opposed to moving these papers forward to the council?
And Kathy has been there a long time, and this is Michael Curtis. I think I'm not sure whether I'm younger or older than she is, but I think it's a good idea to move on, refer it.
Bill, did you want to add something?
The only comment I would make, I guess, it's sort of along what the line that Rob was describing. It's how we portray it to the council. I think we want to continue discussing these things. What if these things pop out as areas that there is, what is the consensus going to look like even on the solutions that we're developing? Are we going to have it there at that point? I guess it's how we portray it to the council. We've identified areas that the committee is going to be taking it up, and what comes out of that process, we'll advise the council on where the committee goes with these issues, right?
That's been the intent. Bill said it good there.
Yeah, David notes that we should have the opportunity to see the final version of the brief.
And I would just amend that. I mean, I'm not going to oppose moving the documents forward. And there was a comment that Sharon made that I think is a good one.
Right. No point taken.
Yeah, and Sharon said, why can't you say there was not agreement to all the points made and the wording used, but there is agreement these statements should be forwarded so they can progress to the next stage.
Yeah.
And Krista suggested Rob, Jake, Doug's point of view could be included in the paper as some feel that, so that the paper gives a complete picture. Jake said agree with Sharon. So I think we kind of get the sense of this, and I'm happy to work with Warren and Tim to smooth the delivery to the council.
Very good. Well, again, appreciate all the comments, all of the discussion, and we will, and certainly this last few minutes will be very helpful in helping us to be able to convey that to the council, and we will do so. Again, appreciate all the time and effort, all the comments, all the feedback, not just today, but throughout this process. They've been very much appreciated, and we again feel that it's helped. It's something that certainly has been a learning process for Tim and I. We've both have learned a lot through this process, and feel that the papers are getting a little better at explaining it all, and providing a good explanation for these issues. So with all of that, we will, I'm sure, see you all soon, hopefully, and have a good rest of your week.
Yeah, appreciate all the time. Thank you all very much.